Welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody, where today we're going to be taking a look at 3 more explosive weapons in New Vegas. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Demolition Charge, the C4, and I guess also the detonator because of C4, although I wasn't including that in the weapons. And we're also going to be talking about the Bottlecap Mines. So let's go over each of these, their stats, pros and cons to each of them, and where you can get them, and how good I think they are. So very first up, let's talk about the Demolition Charge. The Demolition Charge looks basically the same as the frag mines from the base game. However, these are like the explosives, although you can still find frag mines in Dead Money. These are the explosives from Dead Money. So these ones you can get from the machines, which can be pretty good because these are fairly cheap to buy if you want to buy a decent amount of them. And that does make it so that there is an infinite supply of them post Dead Money as well, because you can always go back and talk to the machine and buy more of these, as well as you can get an unlimited amount of Sierra Madre tokens. Most people don't spend them on the demo charges. They'll usually spend them on like weapon repair kits, which honestly is probably better for the most part because there are some better explosives than this. So the Demolition Charge requires 0 explosives and only 1 strength to wield, making it so that literally anybody will have the requirements to use this, which is pretty good. It also makes sense if you want to rush to Dead Money as soon as possible. Although not a whole lot of people want to do that because Dead Money is usually one of the more difficult DLCs. This one does 2 damage on direct hit if you want to throw this and hit something directly with it. However, if you do that, it will explode, and that usually means that you're still within the blast radius. This does 100 explosive damage on top of that 2 damage that you hit with, which is pretty good. That's about the same as the frag mines, which make it so that this one is very comparable to the frag mines. I would say these are a little bit worse, and we'll talk about that in a second as to why. This one does 51 damage per second, or at least that's what the wiki says. Placed explosives, just whatever steps on it will do damage per second. You can't throw these out super fast like any of the placed explosives, so mostly you just want to run enemies across these. This has a big old 0 for crit damage, like a lot of the explosives, 1 times crit modifier, which doesn't matter because you can't hit crits, or you can hit crits, they're just not going to do anything extra. This costs 38 action points. You really shouldn't be using any of the placed explosives in VATS outside of technically like the microfusion cell clusters, because those are technically considered placed explosives. Even then, that's pretty dangerous to be doing, so I wouldn't recommend that either. Maybe the pulse mines and grenades are perfectly fine, but explosives really don't benefit from VATS all that much. And this one, weirdly enough, weighs 1.5 weight, which is quite a bit more than regular placed explosives. Most placed explosives weigh half a weight. This is 3 times as heavy as it. Like I said, this is very comparable to the frag mines, and for overall stats, it's actually extremely close to the frag mines. However, that extra weight is what kind of kills it, because frag mines only weigh half a weight, and they're the most common mine that you're probably going to be finding, at least throughout the entirety of the game. Maybe not at the start, maybe not at the end, but throughout most of the game, frag mines are fairly common. And when you can pick them up and just use them over the demo charge, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to go with the demo charge, since you're essentially getting 1/3 the total usefulness out of it as you could with 3 frag mines that you're probably going to be able to find. On the flip side of that, though, the demolition charges are unlimited, so frag mines are also unlimited, but you're going to have to go to different vendors and buy them. The demo charges you're always going to have a steady supply of if you want to just keep resetting the bunker and getting your Sierra Madre tokens so that you can keep buying them. For the general pros of all of these weapons, they do have high damage. The demo charges actually have the least amount of damage out of the weapons we're going to talk about, but it's still decent enough damage. They also come with all the bonuses of explosives, where they're very good against crowds. They can very easily cripple limbs, and at least with the Bottlecap Mine that we're going to talk about in a little bit, it is craftable, so that is actually really nice. For cons, these don't really have a whole lot of cons. The demo charge is heavier than other placed explosives, but it's not super heavy, and if you're only going to be carrying around a couple of them, you may not even notice that much compared to other explosive builds or other explosive weapons that you might want to carry instead. And then outside of that, it's basically all of the downsides that explosives have, especially placed explosives, where VATS doesn't really work with them. The self-damage can hurt you. There is also quite a few different perks that can help out with these ones too. Demo Expert is fantastic for getting you more damage. Splash damage gives you a bigger explosion radius, which can be a benefit and a downside. Generally, it's a pretty big benefit for placed explosives, since if you place them down ahead of time and enemies run across them, you're just more likely to kill more enemies. You can have hit the deck, which makes so you don't blow yourself up as much. That one's pretty nice. Pack Rat is good with all of these and with explosive builds in general, because a lot of the explosives have a decent amount of weight. I think all of the placed and all the thrown explosives, besides the fat mine, will be affected by pack rat, so you can cut their weight in half so you can carry around more of them, which is really nice. And then Mad Bomber also affects the Bottlecap mines on here too. This doesn't make it so that you unlock the recipe for Bottlecap mines. You actually have that unlocked at the very start of the game. This just gives you the efficient version of it so that you'll be using up less overall materials than you otherwise would. So that one's another perk that can be really useful here. For an overall rating for the demo charges, I'd probably put these things up into like B tier. They're worse than a frag mine, but they're still quite good. They still work perfectly fine as a placed explosive weapon. They, I think, do have more action point costs than some of the other placed explosives, but you're probably not going to be using that in VATS, so that part doesn't really matter either. I just look at this as kind of like a slightly nerfed version of the frag mine, which is still one of the best placed explosives in the game, especially for just general purpose. Let's move on to our other options, where we have C4 and the detonator. Now, the detonator itself is a weapon or an item that doesn't actually have any value by itself, so we're not really going to be talking about that because you do need the detonator to set off C4. If you don't have any C4, the detonator is worthless and it's just some dead weight, but it's not very much weight, so that doesn't really matter. With C4, you have to place C4 and then you can use the detonator to set this off, which does make it very unique for a placed explosive and just an explosive in general, because you can pickpocket somebody with C4. This will have the C4 armed, but it won't go off like a hand grenade or a mine would, so you can set this off whenever you would like, which does have quite a few benefits to it, especially if you get far enough away and set this off. So C4 requires 50 explosives and 1 strength to wield, so low strength like all the placed explosives. Somewhat mid-explosives rating though, that's kind of normal. This one does 1 damage on direct hits with the C4, so if you want to smack stuff with it, you could, and this one won't go off immediately. It's the only safe placed explosive that you could feasibly beat something to death just by throwing C4 at it. This does 250 explosive damage when it does go off, so a lot of damage, especially compared to a lot of the other placed explosives. This one has 82 damage per second, that's what the wiki says, so I'm going to say it here. Big old 0 for crit, 1 times crit modifier, which doesn't matter. This one costs 24 action points to use in VATS, so less than other placed explosives, which maybe you might use this in VATS just to hit stuff with it. I can only really see that being useful on like a challenge run, or if you're doing like a gun game or weapon roulette style of build, I guess. Anything else, you're never going to be using this in VATS, and this weighs half a weight like most of the placed explosives. C4 is actually probably one of the best explosives in the game. There are a couple of places where you can get this and where it can spawn. You can find this in a couple of areas, like explosive boxes sometimes have C4 in them. They might not always come with a detonator, but they can have C4. And even if you don't end up getting a detonator for the C4, it doesn't really matter because C4 is worth a lot of money. So if you ever find it, you might just want to keep a hold of it just because of that, and it doesn't weigh very much either. It's one of the best weapons to weight just out of anything in the game, I believe, besides like unique weapons. If you're doing one of the quests too that requires you to go to the plant vault, I'm forgetting which vault that one is now, the one up to the northwest of the map, where they have like the spore carriers, that vault, you do have to burn that vault, at least if you want to do part of one ending, and C4 is by far the easiest way to do that. Long fuse dynamite is actually really good for that particular quest too. C4 I think is the best use for those type of weapons though, and this does really high damage. You can take out just about anything with C4, and even more so if you played through the games multiple times, you know where enemies are going to be spawning. You can place this ahead of time there, and then wait for the enemies to spawn, and then just set it off and blow them all up. It can be really entertaining and really fun to do this with C4. So I'm going to put C4 all the way up into S tier. I guess the detonator would also go up into S tier, assuming that you have C4. If you don't have C4, then it goes down into F tier because you can't really use it as a weapon. But at that point, it's not even really fair to be putting it against other weapons if you can't use it as one. And then our very last explosive for this video is going to be the Bottlecap Mines. Bottlecap Mines have been in a couple of the Fallout games. They've been in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. They're also in New Vegas. And you can make them at any sort of workbench if you would like, which is pretty awesome. Now, I did mention you can make efficient versions of the Bottlecap Mines if you have the Mad Bomber perk, which is absolutely true. You do need to have 80 explosives in order to do that, but this will cut down on some of the materials. So the Bottlecap Mines require 0 explosives and only 1 strength to wield, meaning anybody can use them effectively, which is pretty cool. This does 1 regular damage on hit, 200 explosive damage, so a lot of damage just from that. This does 66 damage per second, at least that's what the wiki says. 0 for crit, 1 times crit modifier. Costs 35 action points to use in VATS. Again, you don't want to be using this in VATS. And this weighs half of a weight. So it's pretty standard amongst other explosives that we've seen before, especially placed explosives, besides it having really high base damage, which is really good. If you have 75 explosives, you can make these at any workbench. This requires 1 lunchbox, 10 bottle caps, 1 sensor module, and 5 cherry bombs. If you have the Mad Bomber perk, then it requires you to have 85 explosives in order to make the efficient versions, which is still 1 lunchbox, but only 8 bottle caps, 1 sensor module, and 3 cherry bombs. So you can make these a little bit more efficiently than you otherwise would. The efficient version is just better on resources. It doesn't actually have any other bonuses from this. But this is also one of the best placed explosives in the game because it can do such high damage. It also has a unique sound effect since you hear the bottle caps flying all over the place once this goes off, which is pretty cool. So the Bottlecap Mine, I think, is actually one of the best ones, and I'd put this also up into S tier with the C4. Maybe not as good in every situation, potentially better than C4 in a lot of situations though, because you can make these and there is an unlimited amount of resources to make them. So if you're doing an explosives build, I would say try these ones out. And that'll do it for these ones. Tell me your thoughts on the demo charge, the C4, I guess the detonator, and the Bottlecap Mines down in the comments below. How do you enjoy these weapons? And thanks everybody for watching this. I do really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye bye everybody.